Hello everyone, welcome back to my Nuke training videos. In this video we're going to be going over the animation tools in Nuke. This will be a bit of a shorter video because there's not a ton to show, but we'll just be doing a very simple bouncing ball experiment just to show you all the tools. So to go ahead and start, I need to familiarize you guys with the curve editor and dope sheet windows. The curve editor, you'll actually see a graph of your motion and you can move individual keys, and I'll show you that obviously once we have some animation to work with. And the dope sheet is similar, but you don't have any indication of values. You'll just see little ticks based on the timing of things. The dope sheet is really made for retiming elements or lining things up in time, so you can actually do a little bit of editing in here if you wanted to. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and create the ball that we'll have bouncing here. We're just going to do sort of a beach ball. Let's just create a color wheel. Again, you just hit tab and type in what you want, or you can create that up here under draw. I think it's under draw. Guess not. There it is. Okay, apparently it's under image color wheel, and that would create the same thing. Or you can right click, image color wheel, etc., etc. Okay, so we've got our color wheel here. If you look, we have an alpha channel, which means we could layer it over something, which we will do at the end of the video. Alright, so first thing we need to do is create a transform node. The transform node is what lets you animate an image, or simply scale it or distort it. Basically every property in Nuke is animatable. I could technically animate the saturation values on here, or the saturation values there, etc., etc. But we're not going to be doing that. We're going to animate this thing so it bounces. So we want to create a transform node. The easy way to do that, and the way that you'll want to remember, is to just select your node and press T, and that creates a transform node right below it. That typically resides under the transform menu, and then you have transform. Or, of course, right click, transform, transform, or tab, transform. We'll all create that node. Okay, so we've got our transform here. So to quickly go over these controls, whenever you have your transform settings open, so if you've double clicked on it and it's your top node up here, or your top properties panel, you will have an on-screen handle here. And so we've got crosshairs and a big circle around the center of the crosshairs. If you click on the center of it and drag, that lets you move the image around. You can see one of the handles on the side is a lot longer than the others. That's your rotation handle. If you click and drag on that, you will rotate the image. And it tries to help you out by automatically snapping to 90-degree angles. But if you want to disable that, simply hold down Shift while you're dragging, or Shift and then click and drag, and it will stop snapping. And then while you're dragging, if you want to start snapping again, just let go of Shift, and it will snap. Okay, the next thing we have is our scale tools. The scale tools, if you click on either of these little ticks on the top, bottom, left, and right of the circle, you can scale vertically. Top and bottom both do vertically, or left and right will both do horizontal scale. If you want to do a uniform scale, so as to not mess up your aspect ratio, you'll see when your mouse is over the center, it gives you sort of the vertical and horizontal move tool. If you move out diagonally to the edge of the circle that doesn't have the dots on it, you'll get a diagonal version of that same icon, and that lets you scale uniformly without messing up your aspect ratio. And this will also snap to a scale of 1, and if you hold down Shift, it will not. So snapping in general for the transform tool is disabled with Shift. Okay, now these other smaller handles, these are your skew tools. If you click on the top and bottom ones, they will skew along a vertical axis. And if you click on this left one, it'll skew along the horizontal axis. Or sorry, this is skewing along the vertical axis. This is skewing along the horizontal axis. And these also snap, so if you hold down Shift, they'll stop snapping. Alright, so for this we want to go ahead and just scale this ball down, so I'm going to use my uniform scale by clicking on the side of the circle and sort of scale that down. And let's just move this vertically sort of down to the bottom. That's fine right there. And you can see we kind of moved it in X. I'm just going to type in 0 there so it's perfectly centered. And then we're close enough to -300. I'm just going to type that to -300. Okay, so we've kind of got our starting position. Let's go back to our very first frame if you're not there already. And now we need to set a key. To do so, you click on this little squiggly line next to the properties. You'll notice almost all the properties have those, and even if they don't, they are animatable by right-clicking and choosing Set Key. But that button lets us access all the animation tools. The one we're going to be using right now obviously is Set Key. That sets a key at the current time, at the current properties, or at the current values of the properties. You can also do Delete Key. That would get rid of all those keys. When we set a key, it turns bright blue. That lets us know that there's a key on the current frame. And also if we move to another frame now, you'll see they're still blue, but they're sort of a dollar color blue. And that just means that there is animation, but not an animation on this particular frame. So that's kind of handy coloring there, so you can at a glance see if something's animated. Alright, so we've got our frame there. Let's go to frame 10 and set a value on the Y. Let's just click in here, and let's just use our arrow keys in this property and sort of select a digit that you want to move. For example, let's move over to the tens digit and start moving our keyboard with the up arrow, and that will animate, or that will change the property just in that digit. If you want to be more accurate, you can move down a digit and type up and down, or you can move to the left and that'll pop by hundreds. You can also move all the way to the right, and if you start moving there, it'll add a decimal place, and you can keep doing this to get more and more accurate, or whatever you want. Okay, so like 282, let's just say 300. Figure we start at negative 300, might as well wind up at 300. Alright, now you can tell by the color of this set a keyframe here. And now let's just go to the last frame, which is going to be frame 20 of this animation, and we're going to set this back to negative 300. Alright, so if we play now, we'll see that we have sort of an animation going. If we look at our curve editor, which is this tab here, you'll see that it generated a nice curve. Now the controls down here are exactly the same as your node graph, but take into account when you do alt to middle mouse drag, you can actually scale along your horizontal axis, which would be your time, and your vertical axis, which is the value of the property you're currently on. And if you press F with nothing selected, it'll frame the whole animation in your view all the way up to apparently 100. And if you select keyframes and hit F, it'll frame your selection. So we're really only working between 1 and 20 here, so we'll just frame that. Now then, you can see it was smart and sort of automatically added a nice curve here, so this already kind of feels like the proper motion for a bouncing ball. It's got a harsh hit on the bottom, and then a very smooth easing into the top as gravity takes it over. If you select a key and press L, that will break the tangents and make it a linear curve. If you press H, it'll put it back to this horizontal curve that it was. Or Z does a smoothing. This is actually what the default was. In this case, they look exactly the same. But if we drag this last frame, you can see how it automatically slopes that tangent for us. So now it's angled like that. And if we pressed H again, now it's different. That's a horizontal. For this, we just want this to be horizontal, so I just hit H. And we have a good animation here. So that's really all we need. So let's go ahead and animate some squash and stretch on this ball. That's done via the scale. So let's just go back to our first frame. And let's just sort of, well, we need to be able to animate this horizontally and vertically independently. The way you can do that, you can see scale by default is just a single value. Well, let's click on this little 2. That just tells you that there are two values linked together right now, and if you click that, it splits them open. If you click it again, it combines them into one. So when you click it, we can now control width and height individually, and I want to scale the width up a bit and scale the height down a bit. There we go. That looks good to me. So let's go ahead and set a keyframe. And now at the very last frame of this animation, we'll also want it to wind up at the same position, so let's just go to the end and set a keyframe there. And now let's go to the middle and make it stretched out. This is the peak of its animation, so we want to animate that vertically. And that's probably pretty good there. So now if we play, you see we have a nice squash and stretching ball. Alright, so over here in the curve editor, you can see you have the node that you're working in, and then you have the individual properties that are animated. And then there too, if the properties have multiple different settings, for example, scale is one property, but it has horizontal or height and width scaling individually. You can select each of those independently and see their curve. Now the scale is at such a small variance we really can't see the curve, but if we press F, that'll frame its animation. You can see all of its animation is between like almost 0.3 to like 0.4, within that range, so it's a very small curve here. But what we want to do now is set it up so that the ball does not squash until it hits the ground, so right here. So really the frame before that, we want this, we want to set another keyframe in which the height scale more closer matches the width. So we're just going to sort of get these two values about the same. 3, 4, let's just set them both to 341.341, sure. So the ball will become perfectly circular before it hits again at the end. So it bounces up, and then really these two should be. Alright, so we want the peak of the stretching to sort of be to the left a bit, so you can select both those keyframes and then click and drag them horizontally. And then we want this this keyframe here. Oops, Control Y. We want this keyframe here to be also at the peak of the animation. You'll see what I'm doing here shortly, but we're going to do copy values and then go to the very peak, and we're going to paste values. So paste absolute, and there you go. So now this ball is hitting, stretching up, going back to its normal size, so perfectly square. You see both of those are the same value. And then as it comes back down, it stays square until the very last frame where it actually hits. Boink. So we've got some nice squash and stretch going on there. Okay, so now all we need to do is make this animation loop. So we've animated this between 1 to 20, but frame 1 and 20 are actually exactly the same. So if we looped 1 to 20 and then 1 again and went back through, we'd have 2 frames of it on the ground, and that would feel kind of weird. So we actually want to loop frame 1 to 19. So the way you loop an animation in Nuke is you click on the properties animation thing, animation button, and do predefined loop. And now you just tell it first frame of loop is frame 1, last frame of loop again is actually 19, not 20, and we hit OK. So now the vertical motion is being looped throughout, but you can see the scale is not yet. So we need to do the same thing for the scale. Click on this animation button, predefined loop 1 to 19. And there we go. Alright, now you can see that sort of automatically looping this animation for us. And if we hit play now, you get a nice bouncing ball. So that looks pretty cool. Okay, now this image is ready to be composited over something, so let's just do, let's do a checkerboard. Sure, checkerboard is always the safe bet. And we just want to make a merge node, so you can just press M, or you can type it into your tab or whatever. Or merge is typically this right here, merge. Okay, and if we look now, we have that ball bouncing on a background. Well, that's pretty neat. So now, what if we want a shadow? How can we do a shadow? Well, I'll tell you. Alright, so we've got the ball here already. How would we add a shadow underneath this ball, but on top of this background? Well, we know we'd need something going over the background first, and then the ball on top of that, because the shadow would be cast onto the background. So let's just go ahead and make a merge node because we know we'll need that. Drag it into this chain. So we'll have whatever the shadow is, however we make that, over the background. Now we already have the ball animated and set up correctly, so really all we need to do is somehow squish that down so that it matches the ground itself. So let's just make another transform node out here in the middle of nowhere, so I have nothing selected and I press T. And I'm going to hook that into the animated ball, which is this transform node here. So we have animated ball, and then we're going to transform it again. Alright, now the transform node has a setting here for center. This is where all of the transforms are centered about. You can think of it as like a pin that you're putting through the image before you stretch and rotate it. So we want to move this center point downward. To move it, you can hold down Control and click on that center point and move it around by hand, or you can come over here, center, and just adjust the properties yourself. And I want to set this right at the contact point of that ball on the floor. There we go. And no need to animate this, so I'm not going to set a keyframe or anything. That center point is always going to stay the same. And right now, if I go ahead and plug that into this merge over the background, we'll see that nothing is different, because I'm essentially layering an untransformed version of that same image over twice, so absolutely nothing is happening now. So now what we need to do is sort of scale this image down so that it matches the ground. So I'm going to go to my scale, break open those the two properties for the scale on this transform. Make sure you're on the right transform, and then we want to sort of shrink this horizontal height scale here. So I'm just going to drop this down to, let's say, like 0.15 or so. That seems fine to me. Alright, so now if we play, we have sort of a squished mirror image of that ball on the ground. That's cool. Now we just need to make it look like a shadow. So the easiest way to do that is to black out all of the color channels and keep only the alpha. If we look at this transform by hooking our viewer up to it, and we look at our alpha channel, you can see our alpha channel is fine already. So all we need to do is black out these colors. The easy way to do that would be to create a shuffle node. I'll get much more into this at a later date. Actually, no, here. We're just going to do a grade node. Make sure it's set to RGB, and we're just going to drop the gain down to 0. Alright, so you can see it's only affecting the color channels, so it's only darkening the colors, and it dropped those down to black. So now if we look at that over, we now have a black shadow of the ball bouncing there. And then we have our bouncing color wheel sitting on top of that. Cool. Now, maybe this needs a little bit of a blur, so let's just go ahead and do that. Throw this blur in. This is kind of a messy chain right now, but I'll clean this up at the end. Okay, so now we need to blur this. So at the peak of the animation, really we want it to be the blurriest because it's furthest away from the ground. So we're going to drag this blur up to where it looks best. Let's just say something like that. Set a key. Then we want to go to frame 1 and make sure that that's substantially less, possibly even 0. And you can animate these both independently, so say you want to blur it more horizontally but hardly at all vertically, you can do that, which will look pretty good. So we'll go ahead and do that. So on our first frame we've got like 22 pixels of blur, and on our height we've got just a couple pixels. And now we want to match that at the last frame, so I'm just going to click on this animation button, do copy, values, go to frame 20, paste, absolute. There you go. So now we have an animation on this blur. Now that animation isn't looping yet, so we need to make that loop. So we need to click on this animation, do predefined, loop 1 to 19. There you go. Now I have a nice bouncing ball with a shadow, and all is right with the world. So. Okay, so yeah. Hopefully this has taught you guys the animation tools, and we have a nice bouncing ball animation with complete with animated shadow. And you can put this over whatever background you wanted to. In fact, I'm going to replace it with a ramp. Ramp is a tool that just creates a nice gradient. I'm just going to draw a very, very basic... Why can't I move that? Oh, probably because I'm playing right now. I'm going to draw a very, very basic ramp here. Sure, that's good enough for me. Awesome. There you go, bouncing ball on a ramp. Now then, I'm going to go ahead and clean up this node tree a little bit here because this is pretty messy. So I'm just going to sort of get all these in a straight line. And now this branch, you can see it's kind of going behind here, and that's really confusing. So the best way to clean that up is hold down Control, and you see all these little dots show up in the middle of a chain. That lets you just click, and you can sort of reroute the chain. This is just a blank node that does nothing aside from let you organize your tree. And so I'm just going to sort of move this out of the way temporarily, hold Control, click, and pull a dot out here. And then we can just move that back to how it was. So there we go. We now have a much cleaner tree. And I'm going to call this project done. Hopefully you guys have learned the animation tools here. Oh, and sorry, briefly, I do need to show you the dope sheet because it's very handy. Let's double click on our main transform here, the one that's bouncing the ball. And if we go to the dope sheet, you'll see all of the animation keyframes just laid out as little ticks across the time slider here. And this works exactly the same as your other view, except you've only got one axis that you're working on, so you can't, zoom vertically or change the values of anything here, but you can change their timing. So I could slide this left or right in here, or you can scale it the same way you could on the curve editor. But do take note, if we sort of reanimate anything now, since I've set my loops up to only go between the values of 1 and 19, you can see if I drag this past that, everything after that just gets clamped on every loop. So now the animation would be pretty broken. So just something to take into account. Alright, there we go. So we've went over all the tools now. You've seen the dope sheet, you've seen the curve editor, and we've animated a bouncing ball. So hopefully you guys have learned things. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments down below or on my blog. And yeah, next video we'll be going over keying and actually doing a small composite of actual footage. So hopefully you guys will enjoy that. See you later.